right now. Hooded just being completely annihilated. And I'm attributing this more to MVD just playing at this next, just stepping it up to this next level right now. So more than Hooded just not knowing what's going on. I think clearly a little Diddy experience here, but it's just the way MVD is playing right now.
Integral part of some games, while other games seem to lack them quite a bit. The interesting thing about Monster is that due to the way the game is designed, it seems that there are characters who can really utilize footsies, while other characters don't necessarily need to rely on them. Thus, you're able to select your character based on what style of play you prefer, which is probably why a lot of Guilty Gear and Melty Blood players naturally gravitate to Rail and Sealy. In order to understand why, let's take a look at what defines footsies. Footsies isn't easy to define in a single sentence because it's more of a concept than a single action. In fact, footsies combine several gaming techniques into one, and when players refer to footsies they are generally referring to the act of effectively using multiple techniques. Footsies implies the application of zoning, spacing, poking, feinting, psychic DP, and baiting. Zoning is the act of controlling space with one or more moves that can't be beat very easily by the opponent. For example, throwing a fireball controls the space that the fireball inhabits because the fireball itself does not have a hittable box, it only has a hitbox. Thus, the fireball can hit, but it cannot be hit in return. Ryu's fireball controls the space directly in front of him and for as long as the fireball is active as it travels across the screen. Spacing is the act of putting your character in an advantageous position on the screen, which is generally just outside of the opponent's poke range. If you were to take Cammy and perform all of her normal moves on the ground and also all of her vertical jumping moves, you would be able to visually see the space that she can zone control. Now if you were to step just outside the maximum range on all her pokes, then you are properly spaced. Cammy cannot directly hit you unless you act, but if Cammy acts you can then hit her outstretched limbs as they recover. Spacing generally involves keeping yourself as close to your opponent's attacks as possible, without actually getting hit by them. The purpose of this is to pressure your opponent and also to capitalize on whiffed moves. If you can imagine standing next to Urian and he jumps vertically, you then move backwards on reaction until you are standing just outside his jumping roundhouse range. Urian then comes down with the jumping roundhouse and it whiffs. You've just spaced yourself on reaction. Although there was a chance to hit Urian out of the air for an advantage, there was also a chance for Urian to hit you or force you to block, leading to a disadvantage. By spacing yourself just outside his range you've actively removed the risk. The other point of doing this is to limit your opponent's options so that you can actively look for and react to your opponent's valid options. If you space yourself by standing just outside of all of Ryu's attacks other than his crouching roundhouse, you know that he therefore cannot hit you with anything except a fireball or a crouching roundhouse. Thus, anytime you see him flinch you know to watch out for one of the two. Poking is similar to zoning, but the key difference is the move that you poke with is not necessarily a high priority attack, but rather a move that has very fast recovery and is therefore safe to stick out. The intention of a poke is not necessarily to zone, but rather to bait and pressure. For example, Ryu's crouching medium kick is an effective poke despite it not being a very good zoning move. It only controls a short amount of space directly in front of him and very low to the ground, and can be beat by a lot of attacks. However, it has a long hit duration and very short recovery, so it's not likely to be punished on whiff, at least not on reaction, but more likely on anticipation. Feinting is the act of performing the beginning of an action but quickly changing it to another action, which is a way of exploiting anticipation and reaction-based techniques. This makes your opponent believe that you are doing one action in the attempt to trick them into countering your action, when in reality you are going to do a different action. If you can imagine someone raising their fist, pulling it back, and swinging it halfway toward you but then kicking you in the shin instead. This is a feint. Ryu had this sort of technique in Street Fighter Alpha 3. He was able to perform a fake fireball, which looked exactly like his regular Hadouken except no fireball actually left his hands. You might see how this is effective if you can imagine Ryu pressuring you into the corner, and spacing himself perfectly for a fireball, and then performing what looks like a fireball so you jump on reaction to it, but then no fireball leaves his hands. Games like Guru, Mark of the Wolves attempted to implement actual feint moves for all characters, but sadly due to the way the game worked the feints ended up being more useful in combos than for actual feints. Bespasera in Samurai Showdown had a feint move wherein he would create an image projection of himself that would move in a particular way. While the original Becerra would remain temporarily invisible, this let Becerra trick the opponent into thinking he jumped, for example, when in reality he was still on the ground. Enji in Guilty Gear has somewhat of a feint with the ability to perform his taunt, which looks very similar to one of his overheads, but then he can quickly cancel it into a low attack. However, almost every game has some kind of a feint that can be used on a fallen opponent. After knocking the opponent down, it's possible to whiff a very fast attack over the person's body to make them believe you're attempting a meaty, when in fact you are not. Again, the intention of this is to trick your opponent into believing you're doing one thing when you are in fact doing another. Psychic DP refers to the concept of anticipation, being able to anticipate your opponent's actions by limiting their options and pressuring them into making a predictable move. If a huge part of footsies, when you're able to trap your opponent and make them believe that they simply must attack in order to not get hit, that's when you've won. A psychic DP is literally what happens when you walk forward and pressure your opponent, and then DP on anticipation to your opponent's retaliation. It's only really risky if you're not sure your opponent would try and attack, but by limiting and isolating your opponent's options and pressuring them into sticking something out, you have removed the risk. Often a lesser form of anticipation that everyone might be familiar with is sitting and waiting for an opponent to jump or short jump, then immediately anti-air with something like a DP. This wasn't necessarily done entirely on reaction, but some part of it was anticipation. Baiting is essentially countering the psychic DP or exploiting a weak psychic DP in the sense that your intention is to make your opponent look for something and then do another. The act of baiting is simply the application of countering using poor anticipation. For example, if you make them afraid of an overhead by doing multiple overheads in a row and make them Start looking for that overhead so that they can block high on reaction. Then that's when you walk up and throw them because they were too busy looking for that overhead. Likewise, if you know they are sitting there waiting for you to short jump so they can anti-air you, they won't be looking for dashings and vice versa. If you constantly do short jumps at your opponent and your opponent begins to start doing DPs on reaction, you've gotten into their head. You now know that when you successfully put yourself in the position for a short jump, they will be looking for it and are too busy looking for that one thing, so then they don't see another. I call this mental tunnel vision. If you're too busy concentrating on looking for one particular action from your opponent, then your vision is too narrow to see anything other than that particular action. Pretty much everyone should be familiar with the bait, at least on a receiving end, because pretty much all games utilize the idea of forcing you to look for one particular thing so that you can react to it, and thus players will naturally tend to abuse that by making you look for that one thing and then hit you with another. This exists very prominently in games like SF 3.3 RD, Guilty Gear, and Capcom vs SNK 2, and perhaps exists in all games at least on some level. As said, footsies is the application of learning to use each of these techniques against your opponent, and learning how your opponent uses footsies against you. Your goal is to either gain momentum or force your opponent into the corner. To quote John Choi, walking forward is the most important part of footsies. Once you gain momentum or corner your opponent, you have gained an advantage by putting your opponent at a direct disadvantage. Monster seems to have some level of footsies between characters. The reason why I singled out Sealy and Real is because those characters are able to avoid most of these techniques by mindlessly rushing down or rushing away, respectively, meaning these characters are all about randomly mixing high-low and left-right games, which are more of a gamble, or running away and attacking completely safely. When you play these two characters, there is very little application of any of the aforementioned techniques.
I think it's interesting to note that note here that he acknowledges certain characters, certain games just have different proportions of footsies, and how some playstyles and some freedoms within the game space allow players to completely avoid playing footsies. This definition of footsies is way too broad. This is essentially the entire game of playing a fighting game. There's no footsies is a very specific. It's a very specific emergent aspect of the gameplay. So like, you don't want it to include zoning, spacing, which is just a general term for moving your character around, poking, and feinting, which is like, you want to be, feinting is something that almost should be happening almost all the time, that you're not in a strictly advantageous situation. Fighting games revolve largely around doing things that your opponent thinks you're going to do, and then capitalizing on their anticipation of the wrong thing. So this is kind of like a constant, right? Psychic DPs is just anticipating stuff your opponent is doing, and like whether you use smash attacks or dragon punches or just movement or blocks or all these different kinds of things, just sort of playing that double blind space is what fighting games are all about. So you don't need to have feigning and baiting and psychic DPs and then call all this footsies. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's way too much in the definition. So footsies, it's got to be something more specific than just playing the game. And I don't know what's left. If all this is footsies, and then he says some characters in this monster definition will randomly mix up high-low, left-right, which are more gamble, or running away and attacking completely safely. So keep away style and like runaway style is more akin to what you can do when you zone, right? And whether or not you have long range or a disjointed sword or projectiles, like this whole like keeping them at arm's length when they can't do much to you is pretty much how we defined zoning earlier today when we did the stream, and how he defines it for the most part. So I don't know, I think even at this point in the article he's kind of mixing up what he means and what he says, and it's all based on sort of how he's describing things. But let's finish it off. It's a good article still.
Seely's whole objective is to connect just about any move so that she can continually attack you high-low while leaving very, very little frame disadvantage between attacks. This is because she is able to continue attacking high-low without any sort of retaliation, until she eventually hits you. And once she hits you, she is able to just randomly pick what direction to hit you from on, wake up, left, right, and or high-low. Naturally, there is at least a little bit of application of the aforementioned techniques because she does at least need to connection something to begin rushing down. But with the point and shift systems in place, she does not even need to offensively try to hit you. She can simply wait and block her way to a point advantage and utilize power breaks to gain momentum. In a way, her playstyle is very similar to what's seen in Vampire Savior or Melty Blood. Her dash allows her playstyle to be similar to Morgan, Vampire, and Ino, Guilty Gear. Rail on the other hand is quite the opposite. His objective is to avoid everything and keep himself as safe as possible while still attacking. This means he utilizes safe moves, backdashes, and frame advantage as much as possible. Rail does apply zoning at least, but apart from that his whole game is to avoid everything else until his opponent makes a mistake. Rail's playstyle is rather similar to what's seen in Melty Blood and some characters in Guilty Gear. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, though. What this really means is that there is a variety of viable playstyles within a single game, which I personally find interesting. The good news is I personally experienced all of the aforementioned techniques in Monster, at least on some level, which makes me believe that it is a true fighting game. Hopefully as the author, Shokai, continues to work on the game, the characters will get more fleshed out and more dynamic and depth will be added to the game. I'm personally hoping that things are added to this game, and not taken away. The term footsies refers to a subset of zoning focusing primarily on close-range normals, where the most common goals are to knock the opponent down and set up cross-up opportunities. What the hell does that even mean?
Right off the bat here, just identifying the fact that footsies are a subset of zoning, or zoning being just sort of like, zoning is kind of what everyone does in every action game. You know, try to hit your enemy at a place where they can't really hit you back, shoot them when they can't shoot you, or be at range so you can react to stuff like that. Zoning as a general concept is how most people play most spatially based video games. So to identify here that footsies are a subset of zoning is a really key thing, and saying that it primarily focuses on close range normals is also really key, because we're getting more specific for a more specific term for a more precise look at how all these details and precision that we keep talking about what fighting games have, like, well, it's got to come out somewhere in the gameplay, and we're identifying it here that it's footsies. So while many games have space, and all action games have real time, and all sort of brawler, hand-to-hand combat-y shooty games have sort of jockeying around for space and making your moves efficient, not all games have zoning, and only fighting games really have footsies. So like, we're going broad to narrow, and this is very important to understand. So let's keep listening.
Fortunately, it means literally everything at the core of competitive Street Fighter strategy that makes it a difficult subject to cover in one session. None of the short definitions are useful, and it takes time to process conceptual ideas before they can be converted into anything practical. I'll give it a second, but I have a feeling I'll have to come back to this on several occasions, because there's always more to it. Footsies is figuring out what your opponent wants to do and punishing them for being predictable. Footsies is putting your opponent in a situation where they have to take risks they were trying to avoid. Footsies is knowing both characters' attack ranges better than your opponent does, and finding ways to exploit that advantage. The concept is so complex that you may as well define it as close-range critical thinking. When you try to create a comprehensive definition of footsies, that definition refuses to end. Watson, Vale, and Choi could probably write books on the subject. The simplest concrete example of footsies is walking into your opponent's attack range to bait, then into poking at you, walking back out of range to let their attack whiff, then punishing their recovery animation with a sweep. When someone decides to learn footsies, this is commonly the first tactic attempted. However, anyone who has actually tried this will tell you that, alert, people stop falling for it very quickly. Then what do? Well, mastery of footsies is knowing how to punish everything, including your opponent's decision not to poke. Nowadays, most fighting game players are great at explaining the basic components of intermediate play, especially with the more technical games such as SF4 and CVS2. Lots of players hang out on random fighting game forums and read every article they can get their hands on. It's just that you get to a point where it's no longer about what a safe poke and what a good combo. Once you cross over into the realm of green games, everything becomes far more difficult to pin down, and it's not necessarily necessary for success. In fact, some of the best footsies players are terrible at explaining the elements they themselves have invented. Nothing wrong with that. After all, not everyone is interested in turning SF into an online university. Most top players are interested primarily in being top players. For the guy trying to figure out why Dago keeps walking back and forth at mid-range, a straightforward explanation would be nice. The best way to teach yourself footsies is to commit to the following rules. 1. Don't T jump for an entire match. 2. T dash for an entire match. 3. Limit yourself to 1 psychic DP attempt per match. Every round you play with these rules will help you gain a better understanding of your normal moves, will teach you how to control space by walking, and will force you to learn the meaning of patient effects. If you watch any hand tournament match, you LL notice that all top players possess all of these skills. Be gone. T come easy, but that S okay. You LL continue making progress as long as you remember what you right after.
So it's cool. I like this. This is the Sonic Hurricane Footsies primer. It's a series of articles talking about footsies. Goes over lots of examples and lots of things, but for the most part, like the way it's approaching the concept and how complicated it is sort of right on the money. A lot of people should base their definition of footsies around what they established there. I believe, like for the most part, fighting games are such intense genres that a lot of people have to spend a lot of time and focus on just a few games just to even be competent and then say something competently. But not a lot of people have experience breaking out the design of fighting games or any specific game into like a larger context so that the design lessons can be applied to just about anything. That's why a lot of people fumble when they talk about footsies, right? It's like, oh, it's this crazy thing, and I don't know, you do it in Street Fighter. Like, well, okay, it should be a thing or can be a thing in all fighters, and let's look at why some fighters allow it, why some, you never see it. Let's talk about why it doesn't happen in brawlers. Like, we can talk about all this, and it should be really simple. Illuminating design shouldn't be something where it feels like a lot of work, and you feel like you're getting more and more confused. The way I like to do things is just to break things down to easily identifiable thingies, like elements or behaviors, and then count. I just like taking a simple count and then going from there. So that's kind of what we'll be doing tonight. Still looking at the term footsies. There's this article about gaining advantage. Yeah, some of these can get pretty specific, but this idea of stealing frames, and yeah, so like that may be too specific, too intense for what we're looking for. But since we're talking about Smash Brothers, we might as well take a look at what Chris Wager has to say on the subject. So he writes about Smash Brothers Melee a lot. He joins us in the chat often enough, so like we're gonna take a look at some of the things he said about footsies and Smash in particular. So I'm gonna click Chris Wager here, and he's gonna search for footsies and Chris and bring up everything that he said about it. This is some of his newer stuff. This is some of his older stuff. Let's start with the top and go down. We'll read the first half first.
1. Guess your favorite footy game from a fighting game. How about your least favorite? I am not totally sure about my favorite. I like a lot of them. I am leaning on either Guru Mark of the Worlds or Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Both of them get worse as you get better at the game, unfortunately, due to parries and DP breaks, scar and cancels. But I am not at that level yet. I might want to get into Yatagarasu in the future because of its similarity to both of the games, but I haven't had an opportunity. Third Strike just has a ton of great unique normals that are animated superbly. Guru has my favorite show top jump physics ever and normals that allow for crazy air-to-air combat. Least favorite is Skullgirls right now. I feel a lot more limited in my ground movement in that game, even though I technically have more options than the above. And a lot of my neutral game feels really degenerate in comparison to what I do in Third Strike. A lot of crouching MK with Filia, instant air push pressure, similar shit with Big Bang, except getting close for mix-up game into combo, projectile zoning with Peacock Robo. Maybe worse than that is SFIV, because the whole game, S-pacing throws me through a complete loop. SAP to adjust to, and the normals are a lot more uniform than Third Strike, as well as having less movement options than other games. Oh, and I like Melee footsies, because Melee. I wrote a guide on that, okay? Pretty cool. Also noted as the fastest actionable ground movement of any of these games. What are some recurring trends in modern fighting games that you've done? Do you like? For me, S comeback mechanics like X Factor. Sure, comeback mechanics, but also really the tendency to decrease walk speed. Why the fuck is the speed of your primary form of actionable movement so damn slow and newer? Fighters. A couple like Guilty Gear and KOF have runs forwards, which is awesome, but if you ever want to move backwards, you either slow to a crawl, or need to commit to a full backdash. I wrote down the following idea in my little game mechanic notebook recently. Fighting game with dedicated dash button that can be pressed to run a set distance. A la KOF, run can be interrupted with any attack, jump, or crouch at any point, or run in the opposite direction. Letting the full run play out without interrupting it will result in a short period, 20 frames, 30 frames, where you cannot run. You can T-block during it unless you press some other button or button combination while holding back, which expends a special block resource, like need be. S barrier gauge or guard primers, inspired by melee dash dancing, bit more flexible. Though honestly, bring back faster walk speeds. I miss them. I am glad SFE is moving somewhat in the right direction here, even if it's not nearly as fast as other games.
Yeah, so like, fighting game talk tends to get really specific like this, and it's kind of hard not to when you're kind of living and breathing in this world of details. But essentially what Wager's saying here is, you know, whether it's just him not being able to get used to stuff, or he doesn't like the game, or he doesn't feel like the game's good, or whatever, but he's not used to playing against Skullgirls, and he doesn't like the Street Fighter 4 speed, but he likes other mechanics, like from Melee, he likes Garo, Mark of the Wolves, and Third Strike, and a lot of it is just what you're used to, right? Like all these games are so similar in that you're moving around in a 2D space and you're throwing out attacks, like all that's similar, but from there, what options are available to you changes the risk rewards of your options. It changes how you move, how you feel, how you express yourself, what you look out for, and what you're worried about, all of that. So these differences make a difference, and even if they're good changes, like adding depth or fixing glitches or balancing out this and that, like sometimes you just can't get used to them, and there's ideas to go around, like plenty of different ways of doing stuff, but it looks like Wager, coming from a Melee background, likes the freedom of movement. And as you can see down in the outline at the bottom of the screen, we identified that, you know, there's some 4 primary ways you can start talking about how fighters get the job done, and how they zone, how they have footsies, their movement systems, and how they have offensive/defensive pressure, and the ability to dash freely left or right, irrespective or irregardless of your opponent's positioning, is something he kind of wants in more games like Melee. But in a lot of ways, the reason some of these other games work is because you walk backwards more slowly than forwards, so it kind of makes it to where you can close in easily but run away less easily, which is kind of a good thing. So yeah, that's kind of what that's about. Let's listen to another one of Wager's articles here. Move this out. Oh man, he actually made a diagram. We need to take a little bit of time to look at that, but let me fix this first. Too many clicks, too many windows on my screen. Okay. Movement in Melee. This graph assumes that you start in idle facing right. Okay. So you're in idle facing right, you can backdash left, you can dash right, or you can run right. After you dash, you go to a run. You can crouch, you can walk to the right, you can turn around, you can jump, you can air dodge and wave dash, which puts you back down to idle. You can, from your jump, or from your run right, you can turn around, which you don't want, and then run left. But from the dash right, you can dash left, which is an idle frame of 1 frame, so you can dash dance like this right here. And this is kind of like your movement options. Let's see what he has to say about it.
Smash Brothers is a tricky topic. There is a lot of nuances to it that don't exist in any other game I know of, so let's get down to business. Up above is an image, made by Cardano, detailing all of the actions possible from a neutral, standing state using the control stick alone, assuming you are facing right. When you tilt the stick forward, you will begin to walk forwards, with speed proportional to how far forwards the stick is pressed. If the stick is moved into the dash region within 2 frames of it being in the dead zone, it will initiate the initial dash animation. If after 2 frames it is not in the dash region, a dash cannot be initiated regardless of the movement of the stick until it enters the dead zone again. If the stick is moved back into the tilt turn or smash turn areas, then the character will initiate the turning animation. If it is in a smash turn area on the first frame of the turn animation, then the initial dash animation will be started in that direction. While walking, you are allowed to perform any standing action, forward tilt, down tilt, up tilt, FSMASH, down smash, up smash, and all your B moves. This means walking is a nice and delicate way to move while being capable of performing any attack at any time. As noted above, when you smash forward, you enter an animation state called initial dash. This animation plays for a different number of frames per character, and if the stick is held forwards, it will transition into the run animation when it ends. If the stick is released, the initial dash animation will continue to play until it concludes, but you will not maintain your speed forwards, with friction slowing you to a halt. This is called a foxtrot. During the initial dash animation, you are not allowed to crouch. Attempting to do so will make you crouch after a foxtrot. You cannot perform any tilt or smash attacks during the initial dash animation, except for up smash, because jump cancels into up smash, and you are allowed to jump from all grounded non-attacking states. If you smash turn during the initial dash state, you will re-enter the initial dash state in the opposite direction. There is a 2-frame leniency for this, unlike the 1-frame leniency for trying to dash in the opposite animation from standing. Not reaching the opposite side fast enough will result in a foxtrot. This means that you can rapidly alternate directions to begin the initial dash animation over and over again in the opposite direction. This is called dash dancing. If you allow the initial dash animation to play out completely, entering a run, attempting to turn back will result in a long turnaround animation playing where you lose a lot of your speed and cannot perform any action except jump. Jumping during this animation will orient you in your original facing direction in Melee, and the opposite facing direction in Project M, called Reverse Aerial Rush. Because the turnaround animation during run is so long, many players elect to stay in dash dance to get the fastest turn times, allowing them to move with more agility than the run animation over a shorter range. The thing to get familiar with is learning how long you can hold dash in the direction before needing to turn around. This means that there is effectively a distance you allowed to move before needing to turn back. When you learn this distance well enough, you'll be able to move at maximum speed over short distances, weaving in and out of opponent's attack ranges. As possible to run across the stage, staying entirely in initial dash by turning back, then forwards every time you are about to hit the edge of your range. This is a great way to practice using the dash dance purposefully. Varying your dash lengths and having great precise control over your dash will allow you to punish any move. During the initial dash animation, the only attacks you are allowed to perform are the dash attack, grab. The running grab animation is slower. It's recommended that you jump cancel grab to get your faster standing grab, your B moves, and up smash. However, every time you turn during the initial dash animation, there is one frame where the character is in a neutral standing state. On this single frame, you are allowed to perform any neutral standing option, assuming you have good enough timing and dexterity. Performing an action on this frame is called a pivot. Pivots are extremely tricky, but allow you to move at maximum speed and attack with impunity, because they are so difficult. Many people only use pivots for specific applications, like moving in for a quick smash attack. Once you enter the run state after the initial dash, your options increase a little, because you are allowed to cancel run with crouch at any time, and perform any move you normally can out of crouch, all special attacks, all smash attacks, all tilts. Worth noting is that crouching, then dashing the opposite direction is faster in a run than trying to do the run turnaround. This is called the cat tour dash. Wave dashing is a technique performed by air dodging at an angle into the ground as soon as you leave the ground from jump squat. When you hit the ground, there are 10 frames where you cannot act due to landing lag. This means wave dashes effectively have a startup time of 10 frames plus your character's jump squat, assuming you do the wavy dash frame perfect. You can also do this as you land from a jump or come up through a platform. Fastest way to land on most platforms, incurring the same 10 frames of landing lag. The wave dashes of most characters are slower than dashing, with the exception of the characters with the absolute best wave dashes, like Luigi and Ice Climbers. Wave dashes are nice because they allow you to move at dash-like speeds without committing to the more limited set of dash options, as well as retain the same facing direction, so you can wavy dash backwards while facing forwards. They help fill in a few holes in most characters' mobility options. Wave dashes are bad, because they have a longer startup time than dashes and walking. During the jump squat, the wavy dash inherits whatever momentum you had moving forwards, so dashing into a wavy dash will make the wavy dash move further. The angle at which you dodge into the ground also affects wavy dash length. More shallow angles that are closer to parallel with the ground will travel further along it. More deep angles that are perpendicular to the ground will travel with less distance. You cannot wavy dash perfectly to the left or right. You just get an air dodge. However, you can wave them perfectly to the left or right when you jump up through a platform, or land on the ground. You need to do this exactly as you land, close to frame perfect to fit ASM. Totally frame perfect. Doing this will move you a lot further and faster than a normal wavy dash, allowing even characters with terrible wave dashes like Ganondorf to move amazing distances. If you are facing with your back to a ledge and have momentum, you will slide off the edge. Wave dashes allow you to do this, making them great for grabbing the ledge quickly to edge hog. Sliding off a ledge also can cancel any special animation, allowing you to attack faster. And attack animations can slide off ledges both backwards and forwards. In Shield, sliding off ledges will put you into tumble, which can be taken advantage of by opponents.
So like that's Chris Wager going into huge detail about how Smash's mechanics work. I mean, he gives you this cool little flow chart on which states go into each other. He shows you how complex the analog stick is for reading dead zones and other things. Super detailed. Like, this is crazy. And then he talks about all these different states and different things, just talking about some movement in Melee. And I just think Smash has the most complex moving out of any fighting game, especially for one input. Like, other games have like air dashes, super jumps, all this crazy stuff, but just with the stick alone, Smash has so many different states and animations, and it's crazy. But you know, wavy dashing makes it a little crazier, and dash dancing's a little intense in Melee. But now you know it's pretty intense. Evil-agram, he's been in the chat before. He goes by Evil-agram. Yeah, like that. And I think that's his Twitter too. And then let's see what he has to say about footsies and Melee. Yeah, he's the guy I'm always yelling at. So this is kind of like I mean, people say that game's criticism's in a wild, wild west stage where nobody has clear definitions and everyone's just saying stuff and yada yada. Like, but you know, there are cool definitions out there, usable definitions, and everything's just unorganized. We really hope that DO is going to help organize things, so you can just type in a word and get definitions and get linked up to articles where they exist. And these are all of Wager's articles that he wrote on, particularly on footsies, but he's written a lot on fighting games and different things on game design overall. But we're just taking a look at footsies because I think footsies are super important for creating any kind of fighting game. So like, so like, let's look at what he says here about Melee footsies. See, I'm under the position. I go in the position that Melee doesn't have a lot of footsies. It has a lot of potential for footsies, right? But then because other options are so strong, including dash dancing, wave dashing, and L canceling and short hopping, that there's little reason to stay on the ground and do much. Now, like, the metagame has changed over the years. I look at some of the matches now, they got some pretty cool things they try to do, but there's like a blink of footsies every now and then where both characters will be standing on the ground and they'll slightly adjust their spacing without dashing around and fully committing, and then they'll throw out a tilt anticipating something else to do, and then maybe they'll throw out another tilt, and then they'll go back to crazy Melee movement. And back when in the chat, Empty Handed and I were playing Melee as kids in high school, you know, I played Kirby, obviously. He played Samus, and we kind of specialized in footsie style because, I mean, Kirby was kind of forced to respond to whatever style anyone else had because Kirby was such a bad, slow character. So when Matt played footsies, I had to play footsies back. He had better projectiles, Kirby had like none. He had better range, Kirby had none. And he had better weight and all that. But I still love the game because every time he tried to poke at me or wave dash back or wave dash forward tilt and all that, I would match his movement with mine, and we would stay close to the ground and have a lot of fun trying to out footsies each other. So like I that's where I learned how to play footsies essentially, and that's why I like it so much. It's my favorite part about Smash, or one of my favorite parts about playing Smash Brothers. And then that kind of got blown up. Like, obviously Kirby is a weak character overall, so he can't really force any other character to do hardly anything. But in general, you know, if you're not the top 5 best characters, you're going to be chasing them and going by their pace. And if they jump around, you kind of have to match the movement, and there's just not a lot of footsies in Melee, period. That's just how it goes. So, and there's hardly a ground game, right? Like, even beyond footsies, there's a lot of characters don't stay on the ground for very long unless they're chain grabbing, which is, you know, hit or miss if you like that kind of thing. So that's my position on footsies. It's not to say that that's bad for Melee. It is one thing to be very clear that's about things like I used to play with a particular style that got phased out of the metagame, and I can't even I don't play characters where there's not enough pull that I can do with any character that I pick that would force other players to play footsies, unless I play like maybe Luigi against a fast follower or something. So that's something notable to say that a game has something really neat, but nobody's gonna play it. It has potential, but other elements overshadow it. That's a balance issue. And so much of what we're going to talk about in fighting games is such a balance issue. And then this reason why I'm super precise with the language that I use to talk about these things. Sammy has to play footsies. She doesn't have melee movement, really. Bad dash dance and bad falls, but yeah. Hey, we all love Samus for holding down the footsies for it. And she's always been a prime example of it, too, which is hilarious because Matt, in one Smash, one empty-handed Matt, only played Samus, so like that's cool. And Kirby kind of has to always play footsies. Can't really air camp. Can't really do much. So that's kind of our thing. And there were some examples Wager had of footsies in Melee that where the two players are kind of staying on the ground and inching backwards and forward and trying to outpoke and counterpoke each other. And guess what? Two characters were on the screen. Samus versus Samus. So there's no doubt in my mind that, one, this narrow definition of footsies is, it was iPad. I wonder if that's a typo because autocorrect. I think most of the bad characters have to resort to footsies to do anything. So that's a really good point. Let me get to that in a second. So, yeah, it's just beneficial to have a narrow definition of footsies to identify it. Oh, cool. Okay, Matt found the problem. It's important to identify different playstyles, identify the potential for them in the game system, and to understand that the difference between having this playstyle be a major part of both the gameplay and your ability to express yourself could be the difference in like a number being flicked in one column for the entire gameplay experience. Like, isn't that crazy? Balance is so delicate that with one rule, one system, one column, one tweak of a number, you could have much more footsies in Melee or much less footsies in Melee. You can have much more of X, much less of Y. And that's how delicate some of these fighting game systems is. That's how delicate complex game systems are. And I think if you don't have clear words and clear ways of talking about these systems, you have no hope of freaking isolating it, talking about it, building games that do one or the other, or whatever. So I'm going to change this color here to light blue because we're talking about systems and rules. Here we go. And then I might change it later to a dark purplish, so we talk about design space. So yeah, that's a really good point, Lesson Pi. I think most of the bad characters have to resort to footsies to do anything. So what we said earlier today is that, I mean, you can see it right down here. Zoning is the thing you do when you can... Yeah, okay, I'll go over it. So Lesson Pi says, how do you define footsies? So let's go over it right here. Zoning is the thing that you do, or that almost all action games have. If you're playing a first-person shooter, you want to shoot them when they're not looking, or shoot them when they can't shoot you. Whether you have a sniper rifle or an assault rifle, they have a shotgun, or they're going for a melee attack and you use a pistol, doesn't matter. You always want to play that advantage where you can react to what they do, and they can't do much to you from that distance. That's a spatially oriented strategic advantage that we're talking about right here. Almost every action game is like this. Hit them from afar. Not only is it better if you can hit them from afar and they can't hit you, but the further you are from them, the better you can react. The less they can chase you, the less they can see if you run behind a wall. Like, all these good things happen from distance. Field of view is everything in a first-person shooter. Yeah, it's super important. But it's not just shooter. Let's talk about all kinds of action games. Like, indie games like Samurai Gun, Towerfall, you kind of want to shoot them from a distance and kind of stay safe. Let's talk about, Bomberman. You want to blow them up from a distance and while moving so that they have to get through your minefield and not the other way around. Empty-handed says he's run into people in Battlefield diagonally next to them. to melee them because field of vision's a big deal in PC shooters and shooters in general. So zoning is, if you just consider zoning to be the thing that all action games do and everyone's trying to achieve, that's one way to understand zone. Footsies is kind of like a subset of zoning, but it's really something else entirely. And we defined it earlier as when in a fighting game, yeah, distance does give you more time to react. That's a good point. And it's just, everybody understands this, so like we all kind of intuit these things naturally and play with all these same strategies when we play shoot-em-ups and shooters and brawlers and all these kinds of games. So footsies are different. Footsies are, it's probably best defined as engaging in the gameplay system. Like if it's a fighter, you're trying to hit the other person. You may be able to engage in footsies in other gameplay in other games, right? Like Halo 3 swords, and stuff like that. So the most important thing to recognize is that you're playing with another opponent, a target, at least one other target, on the razor's edge of your double blind interplay, using sort of close ranged melee attacks, right? They don't have to be melee attacks, but for the most part, this is what we're talking about. And because they're close range, and you're playing on the razor's edge of like being in their range, which you can't react, and being outside of your range where it misses you, but you can't quite sort of capitalize on the mistake because the moves you're using are they recover too quickly for you to like react too easily and win. You're playing on the razor's edge of your ability to guess and react and play within close quarters. So in Street Fighter Land, people play footsies when both characters, are at a certain distance and it's disadvantageous to jump back or run away or throw a fireball or do anything else. They're both kind of close. And in Street Fighter, when you walk forward or back, you can get swept easily with a low attack. So you might want to block low, but if you block low, you can't move. So you kind of like, okay, block low, get out of block low, walk back, and then you see what they do. And if they attack you low, you try to get back in and attack low back. And there's this whole sort of dance you see. I'll pull up a video again. Let's see if I can find it. That's fake music. I should put on some music. I don't know what kind of music I can put on to avoid copyright buttons. But let me see what I can do here. Let me pop this out. Street Fighter video. I have like 18 million tabs up, so you'll forgive me if I get lost in the ether for a little bit. Wow, I have no idea where I am. Oh man. Oh man, oh man. I'll kill that. Okay, who cares? Let's just look at, I'm just gonna use YouTube. And I'm gonna say Daigo. Ooh, this one should be good.
More than Makoto, who also benefits heavily from meter. But yeah, you will use core play of just sort of low forward fireball game, which is one of Daigo's hallmarks, is solid enough to let him generate meter to get right. Oh, 3 fireballs in a row!
And then it's just an uppercut.
Basically a big finger in your face at the start of the round. Wow, Daigo out for blood. I like this.
So right now,
Daigo.
oh my gosh.
Just like that, Daigo.
It's crazy. So Daigo just putting on the pressure against this really good Makoto player. He just got his face in that match. Usually these two characters would play some good footsies, so let's see what happens here. Like when to throw a fireball, when to do a jump hit like that, when to get in. They're both kind of rushed down, so maybe we're not going to see too much of a jockeying of space, but geez. That's insane. Man, these guys are just, that's so high level. Maybe we're not going to see too much of the wavering back and forth and jockeying for space, because they're just in there. Like, Daigo's going 100% in. This is not the best match to show. Oh, crazy. Or cross under. Weird. So, Footsies, it's about existing that razor's edge, right? And the reason that's important for fighting games is that fighting games are designed with double blind interplay as their core method for the balancing of their moves. So sometimes the only thing you can do to get in is to do your counter move at the same time, which is in essence involving guesswork, but you know, you can minimize guesswork by playing smart, baiting, playing safe, conditioning your opponent, so on and so forth. But Footsies, it's like the razor's edge of that, where the distance in front of you is negotiated by pixels, and you're trying to both get inside of range quickly and do something, or get in the range and get out of it quickly, so when they do something that it misses, and you capitalize on these like pixels and frames worth of advantages and disadvantages. And that's usually how it plays out in Street Fighter, because their moves have highs and lows, and they exist in this really tight space in front of them. It's a little different for other fighters, but ultimately we need to see both characters engaging in melee combat close to each other, not necessarily landing hits and not necessarily trading block strings, but the very opposite of that. Like, they're close enough where they're almost hitting, but they're not getting blocked, and they're not landing blows all the time, and they're just trading off these little negotiated spaces. Oh wow, so that was a crazy match. Let's see if Daigo can actually show something cool here. Right there. But yeah, so that's what Footsies is, and a lot of people get confused because they're like, oh, Footsies involves zoning and poking and stuff. Like, you know, different games get it done different ways, but the important part is to recognize where the razor's edge is of the player's control on their ability to fight each other. That's important. And you'll see a distinct movement style. Normie Ryu. Yeah, you'll see a distinct movement style. This video is so old, it's not even in widescreen. This is pathetic, but we'll see with Footsies. You see a distinct movement style in how they move. Like, look at what's happening here. These tiny shimmies forward and back. And like there, he missed it low and got counter hit with a large sweep. Like, that's important. So, like, let's see what happens when they both try to get in. You see the tiny walk backs and forwards. Like, it's not a lot of Footsies happening right now because they're not too good at the game. But you can definitely see, like, the little shades of it happening. Where, like, oh, right there. Every time he's getting counter-poked when he misses that low medium from Ryu. And Fei Long is doing his crouching fierce. Like, that's part of Footsies. Baiting the range and having the counterattack coming right on point. But also, playing around in the timings and spacings of these moves. This is what Footsies is, and it's very hard to play Footsies. That's why when you want to engage with it with people in games where they don't have to play Footsies, they'll definitely opt out of it. Most people will just run away or do something simpler. And what's more simple than running away and throwing fireballs, or like in Smash Brothers, like running away all the time and rolling out? But it's much harder to play Footsies, but it's much more rewarding because this is where it's super exciting gameplay happens. So look he tried to set up a jump in right there, but Fei Long kind of countered him. This game looks sad. Right there, those little kicks, those diagonal kicks to step over low attacks, like this, they're playing Footsies. Even though it's not as advanced as later stuff, this is good stuff. And like, if your game doesn't look like this, where you're negotiating the space with these close range attacks and kind of like occasionally doing something jumping, or occasionally doing something bursty or risky, then you're not playing Footsies. Like, you have to negotiate the space between you, not just try to overwhelm your opponent by crossing them up all the time or running away or shooting stuff from across the screen. Like, look at how tight this is. Throwing out those moves and getting counter hit and counter poked all over the place, right? Street Fighter V has Footsies too. It's just great for that. So like, if you're zoning, that's one thing. If you play Footsies, another thing. Another thing that a lot of fighters do, especially Melee, they focus more on movement than Footsies, and it's all about movement and like the freedom of movement. being where your opponent, like, it's just hard to hit a moving target. So the more you can move, the harder it is to just sort of stand your ground and fight back. So like the more extreme the movement, the harder it is to play some of these fighting games, but they're based around that. So the idea is you need to move and hit them when they're going crazy, and then they need to move as well and try to hit you. Oh my gosh. Momochi versus Daigo. Alcoholic references. Oh my gosh. And like that's a very specific thing. I think a lot of people try to make footsies include more than basically playing at close range like that. They want all the aspects of their game to be called footsies, and it just isn't. It doesn't have the same mental effect on you. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't play the same. And it's important to have the narrow definition, because when it does happen, we can just be like, that was footsies. Oh, Fox is flying around. Let's true that. So what we've learned is because fighting games are a subsection of action games, and maybe even a subsection of brawler style games with melee combat and all that, you know, movement and moving around and attacking, that's at the core of the entire genre. But what we like to say with fighting games is there's something that's much harder to both design and much more distinct to engage in and play with that we call footsies, and that's one of the biggest differentiating factors of fighting games versus other genres of games played at a high level, including shooters and I don't know, League of Legends and Splatoon, all those other kinds of games that also are action games and use space, but they do not have footsies. And I don't care if you're like you know, pushing your opponent back and forth and you're jiggling around and trying to vie for space. You should always be vying for space or optimizing your moves, but footsies is something different, and it's more than just looking like you're negotiating space. You actually have to get in there and use your moves to sort of speak the language. And even though footsies may involve moves that you may typically see in zoning, like fireballs, like it's about this razor's edge that, see how Daigo's trying to get in right now? Daigo's the Ryu that's burning. And he doesn't want to throw too many fireballs, because if one gets predicted, there's mega damage if they jump in. So like they both know that, so they're suddenly changing their timing. And then when they get in right here, they're just trying to mix up. Daigo's trying to mix up his approach. Yeah, right there. You see that? Oh, that was beautiful. It's freaking. Okay, let me show you guys. Conditioning is a big part of fighting games, and knowing that you can't always rush your opponent down perfectly. Knowing that all your moves are going to have holes in it, but if you get in your opponent's head, that's important. So this is what Daigo does. Gets a throw down, does a attempted cross up, jab, jab, grab. He knows his opponent just got owned on that setup, so he's going to change his setup. Check this out. Crossed up, jab, jab, and then instead of going for the grab, he backs up and then kicks him in the face, perfectly stepping over that low attack that Ken just kicked out, because Ken anticipated Ryu to go in for another grab. That's crazy. He implanted the idea in his head and then countered it. Now, that's not something exclusive to footsies, but it's something that plays out in these beautiful, tight spatial relationships that you see here. This tiny little space below Ryu's leg. Let me back it up just a little bit. Trial number 1. Oh, I couldn't do it in the frame, but like you see that, like that tiny little space that he made, he kicked over it. And then when you realize, wait a minute, like the exact way that my character animates their body and the exact way their limbs move, and he basically lifted his leg up so it wouldn't get kicked and kicked him in the head, like that makes a difference. Like, yes, the kind of detail that is put into these games in terms of the timing and spacing and animation matters when you it matters most when you play footsies. And I don't know why you would bother having a whole frame data chart with like mountains of data, mountains and mountains of frame data and animation data and properties and hitbox sizes if those little differences never matter. Like it's got to matter at some point in your gameplay, and it's got to matter in a way to where each one of those data points is a distinct thing that both players feel and strategize around. And if your players are flying around all the time, they may not understand this sort of minute spacing, this tight stuff that happens here. And if your players are constantly running away shooting each other, then why bother having melee attacks in the first place? Like, why bother tuning it or whatever? So this is why I think footsies is the essence of fighting games, because it brings into focus all all the animation detail and timing detail and hit properties into a very concentrated space, and where all that data matters. It focuses on conditioning and patterns and double-blind guesswork, but that's what's at the essence of fighting games anyway, and it's at the razor's edge of it. So like you are dancing in and out of this super uncomfortable zone that most people don't want to play in, but this is like the razor's edge of where fighters live and die, right? Like true fighters love this kind of stuff and they'll engage, and other people just like to play in the fighting game world where they run away and shoot you. Props to them for getting their victories, but this is what fighting's all about. So now he's got him backing up, and they're gonna trade these low moves and then try to condition it, going for a grab. They're both crouching a lot, so then okay, beautiful. Look at this. So like, how do you open someone up that just keeps blocking and stuff? Oop, I'll show it here. Oop, no, I didn't do that. Right here, okay. I'm gonna slow it down. Speed 25. So how do you open up someone that keeps blocking? First you go for the grab, and you're like, okay, I've tested his ability to reflexively do something when I get close. So now check this out. Fakes it, crouches like he's gonna grab, and then he punches instead of grabbing at a distance to where Ken couldn't react in time to see that he was gonna punch. So he's like, oh, he's got to grab me again. And that's the second time Ken fell for the first time grab, second time get blown up pattern. And he opens up his defense just like that and then proceeds with a stronger combo. But then he drops it. Oh. He drops it. No. Gets countered immediately. Oh. So some people think fighting games are all about just like getting pressured and doing risky things, like DP out. Like, well, it's nice to have some of your options available to you and know which ones are risky, but the relative strengths and weaknesses of those risky options take on sort of new balancing and new context when you actually play at a higher level, where you don't want to do the risky things, but you pull them out as a trump card instead of the thing you do when you get nervous. So Lesson Pie says, my definition of footsies is too small, and I think footsies exist in most multiplayer action games. Well, the whole point of this discussion is to find, both to identify and define things about fighting games that are unique to fighting games. And, whether you think that concept needs to be called footsies or not is one issue, but the other issue is like you need super precise words to actually highlight some of these differences in the first place, because most people, even people within the fighting game community, can't articulate these ideas despite being steeped in the culture and heavily invested in playing them. I don't know what you're including in your definition, but certainly you could see how each four of these things down here in the bottom area of the stream layout are different, and they don't overlap. When you're doing your zoning or projectile spam or camping or ranged attacking, the idea is to do it at a distance where your attacks are reactable, but you're doing it at a distance where you can't be counterattacked on reaction. So they're pretty much like, even if they can jump over your fireballs at full screen, you don't have much to worry about because they can't jump over a fireball and get you at that distance. Same with other action games, so like you're trying to get them from a distance, you're trying to keep them out and stay safe as possible, using distance as that primary agent to keep things safe. And you can see how that doesn't overlap with footsies, which is being close enough to where almost anything you do in your entire moveset is dangerous. Where the difference between the windows that you open up are not reactable, but they open and close so quickly that you pretty much create sort of a concentrated engagement zone where the very language that you choose to speak with are these super fast punches and kicks and micro movements, where every micro step says something and it conveys intent, and you can see the reaction in your opponent and then like play around that. You can see how those two different types of the ways I describe those gameplay is very different, and one is very sort of safe and reactive, and the other one is very sort of, or you say even you can react to things. The other one's like you can't react to things, so you play with a lot of anticipation, or you play on the edge of your emotions. Like you react to things before you know you react to them. You play with fear, you play with confidence. Like all of that happens when the distance is so close that you have to. It like heightens those things. You can see how those two things are different. You can see how movement is different from all those things. Like footsies is about engaging with the attacks, zoning is about attacking, but movement alone is just like an orthogonal system. Like how free is your movement? And then offensive and defensive pressure is just other particular quirks and properties of the combat system. So like with these four things alone, you can get a really good way to differentiate and therefore appreciate the way that a bunch of these fighters do what they have to do. I think a lot of people think, so there's like a debate that we might catch some of later, but like a lot of people get upset when you say their game doesn't have footsies, and like I think a lot of people realize footsies is one style of fighting gameplay, and even though I think it's like the cool style and it's the most fighting gamery, like I said before, even Melee has glimpses of it here and there, like blinks of it, and like other games have more or less of it, and so on and so forth. Like your game doesn't have to have it to be good or to be enjoyed or whatever. Grab me a link, Jonathan. We'll watch some Tekken jiggling. Yeah, I'm gonna click play on this, and then we need to listen to Wager's thing real quick. So like we saw some sweet footsies. We'll end it on Ken wins for now. We'll go back to this. I'm gonna hit play, and just consider what this means for how you understand fighting games, and how you talk about them, right? Whether we ultimately want to go with a bigger definition or a smaller one, like we can always talk about that after. So check this out.
Alright, here. As my footsie speech. I wrote this for my local Smash group, and now I am passing it on to you. A lot of beginners when they learn to dash dance, don't really know what dash dancing is for. They just do it because they know it. Tekken makes you unpredictable, then they get scraped because nobody going to respect someone who just DDs in place. Dash dancing really starts to work for you when you learn how to use your dash purposefully. You gotta understand that dash dancing isn't just moving back and forth to be less predictable. It's about your character having a certain range of space on the ground that they can move at maximum speed through, capable of weaving around attacks, and as long as you keep turning back at the periphery of this range, you can keep weave around anything. It's helpful to be familiar with all the movement states in Melee. I might cover those in a different guide. The first component of this is whiff punishing. When someone attacks you, and it misses, there is a period where that attack must recover. Dashes in Smash Brothers are so fast that they can get in on people during that period, and usually grab them, depends on the character. So what you can do is, if someone comes at you with an attack, you can stand within that attack's range, dash out of the range, let the attack whiff, miss you, and dash back in to grab them. This is the basic whiff punish. You can whiff punish grabs, dash attacks, SHFFLs, on almost all characters, most tilts, most smash attacks, and a lot of other options, as long as you have enough space to move back, then forward, to hit your opponent when they miss. Because whiff punishes work on so many things, they extremely useful. They can beat out a lot of air and special move options too, forcing the opponent to respect whiff punishes on the ground. Our other two footsie options are pokes, and going deep. Pokes are moves you throw out to prevent your opponent from moving in on you. Poking too close to an opponent can lead to getting shield grabbed, so you want to poke at max range, while still hitting them. You want to throw pokes into the space your opponent is about to move into. Pokes are almost always fast startup moves with fast recovery and decent range, so FTILTS and DTILTS on many characters apply, as well as many character SSHFFLs. Pokes get beaten by whiff punishes, unless they connect with either the opponent's body or their shield. Pokes can be beaten by other pokes. These are called counter pokes. Like a SHFFL will beat a DTILT frequently, and many FTILTS or U-tilts can beat SHFFLs, but DTILTS can go under those or outspeed them. Beating those out, poking before your opponent does will also beat the poke. Again, these options vary by character. Going deep is the equivalent to throwing in Street Fighter. The idea is that when your opponent is non-committal, trying to bait something from you to whiff punish. If you go deep, then they need to poke you to force you out, or they get hit. Many attacks are great for this, especially because you can run cancel when you go outside your dash dance range. Dash attacks work for this on many characters as well. The idea is to overlap the space they going to dash in with a hitbox. Pokes whiff punishes going deep. Pokes again, so you have this counter triangle. Pokes stop your opponent from moving in on you. Going deep. Whiff punishes will beat pokes by avoiding getting hit and retaliating. Going deep will beat non-committal dash dancing, so it beats whiff punishes. Of course, poking to keep people out of your space can itself be whiff punished, so you can move into people's space then out of it to bait a poke, and whiff punish that poke. Moving in is pressure, moving out is bait. The goal is to watch what your opponent is doing, because you get to see what they are about to do based on the way they move before they do it, then make a read, and try to beat whichever one of these 3 options they attempt, and convert that into a punish ideally. Figure out which of these 3 they relying on the most, and try to focus on the options that beat their particular playstyle, as well as read which option they are going to go for right here and now. All of these things open you up to risk. None of them are perfectly safe. Everything counts as a commitment in its own way. If you get scared, then you are not going to make yourself safer by overly committing to any one option. Victory depends on your ability to figure out your opponent's patterns while they simultaneously try to figure out yours, and both of you adjust on the fly based on what you just saw your opponent do. But this ISN? Perfect rock paper scissors. You get hints based on what your opponent does before they actually commit. So have some fun, change up your patterns, and figure out what theirs are before they catch on to you.
So this is Wager's way of explaining. This is the way of Wager's way of explaining how Melee works. Some of the what he calls footsies, and going deep just basically means short hopping in and going all the way in without throwing an attack, just kind of going in there. Let me see what it's. Going deep is equivalent to throwing in Street Fighter. The idea is when your opponent is non-committal, trying to bait something from you to whiff, you just go deep. Then they need to poke you to force you out, or they get hit. Just basically going in there. So like I've heard a lot of people describe things like this, including King of Fighters, right? They'll describe some element of the game and some of the counters for it, and then they'll be like, yeah, this is footsies. And I've heard a lot of other people describe that footsies is just what you do in neutral in a fighting game, but that's also not true, because in neutral you could both stand at full screen and throw fireballs, and that's not footsies. You could also just throw a lot of projectiles and have one guy block a lot, and that's what one person's doing in neutral, zoning them out, and the other person's blocking a lot. You see that in Marvel vs. Capcom a lot. Oh, we could probably watch the Marvel vs. Capcom 3 finals with Kate Blue River versus Filipino champ. That was super sweet. Yeah, like that's, and then like ultimately I think that's missing the point. So in all of fighting games, hopefully in all of these action games period, if they're played at a high enough level, there should never be a point where you're just like, and I'm standing around doing nothing because I have nothing to do, and video games are boring, right? Like you're always moving. I mean, these games are designed to be filled with interactivity and action, so you should either always be moving for your objective, always be communicating with your team, always be trying to milk some kind of resource, which whether it's positionally or whatever. Like you're constantly doing stuff in these games, and I know like StarCraft and other games start off a little slow, but you're constantly kind of like planning for your next strategy and kind of building some stuff, and maybe you have a few idle clicks at the beginning, but that quickly sort of phases away as you get into the early game, stuff like that. So it's nothing special to say like, guess what, in this game you're constantly trying to win. You're like, yeah, we get that. No, guess what, the options you choose have counters. Well, yeah, hopefully. I mean, unless it's sort of like bowling or whatever, head-to-head games usually have counters, right? And these are things you have to consider. So like that doesn't mean it's footsies either. And they're like, oh, like look, I want to choose these options versus these options. Yeah, like I said, everything has counters, but most of what we're talking about with recognizing these different playstyles are some distinct and clear things that a lot of these fighting games have and can do and share based on design. But this is under the assumption that in between there's a lot of different ways that these fighters get it done, including mixes of these things like zoning and footsies and movement and offensive pressure and block strings. All these different things can phase so quickly in and out of each other that it's not just like we're going to do a solid 30 minutes of footsies. This game has footsies. Like it just comes and goes, and it's kind of like an overall thing that you're looking for, how much footsies your game has. So I don't think it does us a lot of good to say like, oh, check this out, this game has some cool things that happen here. We assume your game has cool stuff, but it's not necessarily footsies. So here Wager describes this triangle that happens in Melee, and he's talking about how pokes beat whiff punishes, or whiff punishes beat pokes that people try to do to stop you from running at them, but then when they try to whiff punish you, you can go deep to beat that, but then when they go deep, you can get poked again, so it just keeps going around the circle. Yeah, that makes sense. This kind of basic basic interplay happens a lot in spatially based action games, especially if they're not shooter based, right? And like, it's probably a lot more prominent in fighting games because they're based on this double blindness, so like you feel compelled to throw things out early to stop stuff because you just can't react to everything. But a lot of this stuff is just true because the game's in space, like it has 2D or 3D space, and you have attacks. This is what's going to happen. If you have a punch, you're going to keep people out if you think they're going to run in on you. If you think they're going to punch you before you get there, you may have some options in your kit to change your path or slow down a little bit to throw off their punch, and so on and so forth. Like, that happens. So it's not necessarily footsies to have this kind of stuff. Dash dancing and stuff. I was thinking before how important it is to that players sort of stand still and like stand relatively still when they play footsies, and how much can you take even the most narrow definition of footsies and sort of string it out to say like, well, this game, the characters aren't standing still, but it's still footsies, even though they're zipping across the screen, and how much that's relevant. It just gets harder and harder to get such clean interactions and have the gameplay play like we've seen before in the other footsies examples. The faster the gameplay moves and the more movement options you have, because then instead of using your attacks to bait and like tiny micro steps of movement, like you're using extreme movement, you're dashing in from so far away and you're committing to so little oftentimes, that the game just kind of becomes like a more movement based hit and run, chase and follow up and so on and so forth, which is kind of how Smash plays. So we'll take a look at some this Tekken link real quick. Beep. Oh, kill that. Oh, party. Who didn't invite me? Let's keep looking at this. I think footsies is what happens with any non-reactable space. Zoning is vying to control space that gives you an advantage with attacks or potential threat of attacks. Okay, it's taking back. 1 second. Hey, we got our Tekken dancing going on. So Lesson Pie says, footsies is what happens with any non-reactable space. So when you get close enough, you play footsies, but that's not true. There's a lot of games that have what some people call frame game. So let me show you what's happening here. Right now, both these guys are kind of like dancing. I don't know how effective this is, but this is kind of funny looking. I mean, they're really sort of playing in the 3D space by using their side steps and forward and back wave dashing movement to try to throw off the other person. And neither of them seem to want to throw out a poke, but they'll do it eventually. And then let's contrast this with YouTube Marvel versus Capcom Finals Kane Blue River Jam. Don't you look at my screen. Okay. So it's not enough to say that getting within a non-reactable distance creates footsies. It's just not true. Footsies are a very distinct kind of interplay-rich gameplay style and zone that you have a ton of options and you can play in them. But there's times when you get so close to your opponent in other games that there is no interplay. You just either completely shut them down or you get completely shut down. And even though a lot of that time, that space that you engage in is unreactable, like it doesn't mean that there's a whole bunch of interplay going around. It doesn't mean you're utilizing your melee attacks or anything. And so let's see some of the extreme pressure that goes on in this fantastic final set in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So in this game you can call in assists and they can add to your attacking pressure. And when you get combos in this game, they're usually a big deal. As you can see here, Hulk is pretty strong, as you might imagine. Being able to kill these characters Okay, so look, pressure, threw in missiles, tried to block it, grabbed, threw him into the missiles. This is unreactable for the defending player, and the offensive player is just kind of, he can't react to the defending player either, but he's just trying to lock out their options a lot. But it's very one-sided, right? This is what we call like extreme offensive pressure with layered attacks. It's one of the things I have on the little diagram down there. It's kind of cut off. But you have layered assists because you can just add on the block pressure and add on the mix-ups and vary up the timing and do all this stuff. And there's not a lot of back and forth happening here. There's not a lot of interplay. There's not a lot of pattern-based mix-ups happening, not necessarily, but it's just kind of like stifling pressure that leads into small openings that they try to combo and ride out to victory. Oh, Jonathan. So like we were saying before, fighting games don't always have footsies, and they always don't have the same proportions of footsies, and it's a very distinct kind of play style and gameplay experience that is worth noting, and also hard to maintain via other balancing rules. So it's worth talking about when games either get it or don't get it for whatever reason. So like in this game, where are all the footsies? It's just like complete block pressure, or you get your own anti-block pressure. Now, there are times when this game does have footsies, and it does happen in this grand final set, but if you just kind of look at it a little bit, you're like, okay, when does this start looking like this? I'll show you. I'll go back. Okay. Oh, backing up a little bit, going forward, taking advantage of that tiny little window. Okay, ooh, punching when he thought he was going to do whatever. Oh, completely read him in the corner. Okay, let's go back to this. Let's see if we can find a moment like that. Oh, Hulk is punching, missiles are coming. Guy flies up off the screen to escape. Pressure, kills a man on the top of the screen, and then adds more pressure, and then throws in some more assists. Not exactly what we just saw in the other video. Let's go to Tekken real quick. Let's see what they look like. Just random matches, random points. Okay, back and forth, kind of, going back and forth. Dashing in and out. Ooh, just made him whiff a punch, hits him from the side. Like, okay, completely different than what we see in Marvel vs. Capcom. And it's completely different than what we see in anime fighters. It's completely different than what we see from a lot of heavy offensive pressure-based games. So it's not exactly just the fact that it's unreactable. It's when the game gets at these close quarters, how rich is it, and how does it how do players engage in the cool melee attacks that should populate the majority of your character's moveset, right? These fighting games, each character has like 25 to 40, 50 moves, right? And that means, and most of the moves are projectiles. So like when you get close is when you can use most of your moves. Is that what's most interesting about your game? Or is one of your primary moves the ability to move away and like jump around and to run away and just use pure movement to burst in and out? Are you negotiating inches? Or are you negotiating huge distances by dashing in and out? Do you close in the gap with air dashes and dash dancing, or do you close in the gap by walking and using your moves in very specific ways to change your shape and to create baits and opportunities and holes and openings and all that stuff? Like that's a difference maker. And like all these fighting games share the basic components of they're characters beating up each other in some kind of space, but if you just look at how they play, they look different because they are different. They are different because the moves that you have and the balance thereof, the balance that exists. And that's why some people like some fighters and why some people don't. It's not like, it's less and less mysterious once you identify some of these core elements, because to deal with these things both offensively and defensively, you have to put yourself in different headspaces. And if a game that is mostly footsies happens, it's a very different headspace. And it drives a lot of people away, and then they make excuses like the combos are too hard to do, when it really, like, the hardest part about playing those games is understanding the footsies part, which has little to do with combos. Even though you always want to set up for your good punishes and stuff, like, that's not the hard part, in my opinion. Whatever. So yeah, it doesn't do us any good to say like anytime you can't react to something, it's footsies, because as the name implies, like, you would think footsies is like kicking at each other and keeping at each other at foot poking distance and kind of moving back and forth like that, kind of like the word implies. And we can't just call anything that, because Everything can't be that. And if zoning was vying for control space, that gives you an advantage. Wouldn't that be just like every single moment of a fighting game you're not in a combo? Like you're constantly vying for space. You're constantly trying to get advantages. Cool, so let's, did you find something for me, Jonathan? Let's see. Virtual? More Tekken? People dancing around? Okay, let's go back. Somebody needs to find some Soul Calibur. One thing that always bothered me about Tekken was, you know, punching bodies that are on the ground and they flop on the ground when you're punching the air above them. I mean, that disconnect for me just like completely doesn't sell me on this game, and I never got into it ever. Ouch, that hurts. Okay, Virtual Fighter. That's cool though. I recently watched the tournament finals. I think of Fudo playing the drunken guy. Oh. Alright, but you can see how this like has footsies, right? Like you can see how they're being really careful about how they attack in the space and move in the space, and even though they get hit sometimes, it's not a big deal if they can, because certain times they're only making themselves open to moves that if they got hit wouldn't be a big deal. So even though they're awfully close to each other compared to Street Fighter, like let's look at the footsies in Street Fighter real quick. Like even though they're much closer, I think, like you can see like two bodies lengths in between the characters when they're playing footsies in Street Fighter. That's just because of the nature of 3D fighters. I think they whoa, that was nice. So they're just going to stand closer to each other in Virtual Fighter and in Tekken 2. At least in Virtual Fighter. It looks like the whole arena is just much smaller. Maybe it's like the smallest level in the game. But yeah, like you can see how their moves have highs and mids and lows and side steps and all these properties, and they're kind of negotiating the space with their moves at the same time of getting around the other people's stuff. So like, it looks much like a choreographed fight in real martial arts films, right? The punches and kicks make sense, and they're doing all that junk. And let's go back to the Marvel vs. Capcom, right? Do you see that happening? Not the same style of fighting game. You know, still highly competitive, still got its own stylistic things going on, but not the same. And if you love that kind of stuff that we saw in the other things with the footsies, I would not recommend playing this game. Ooh, see that was like the only case of footsies in this first day. Look, he crashes down. I'm gonna slow it down. And then this super right here when he hits the ground would normally leave him open, but then he cancels it. Right when Doom right here sticks his leg out to punish it, he goes X Factor, which means like he gets rid of his commitment to that super, and then punches his outstretched leg. That was footsies. It was a bait. It only happened in the blink of an eye, but it also only happened because it got close enough to where the normal moves actually mattered in this situation. Otherwise, they're gonna throw a whole bunch of junk at each other and try to get long combo strings. So that was amazing. You might see a little bit more of that in this grand final set, but this is kind of what we're talking about. Like, even though it leads into this huge combo, right? That was an instance of like negotiating this tiny space and and creating a bait, if you will, a bait that worked because of the closed space, not just because of I'm throwing a bunch of rocks at you from the screen and there's missiles and you don't know where to block. Oh, missiles! You don't know where to block. See what I mean? Cool, another video. Soul Calibur. Cool, I'm gonna watch some Soul Calibur. She can't control it, by the way. Phoenix, she can never control it. Skipping ahead. I used to know one of the best Soul Calibur players in Texas back when Soul Calibur 3 or 4 was a thing. Oh no. So I think Soul Calibur has even less sort of footsies action than Virtua Fighter, of course. They say Virtua Fighter is the best 3D fighter, but Tekken also gets some stuff done. But I think in general people think Soul Calibur is the least footsies. And it's mostly about exchanging these hits on block and playing around a little bit with the frame advantage. But you know, it's got to have stuff, right? Like you can kind of see parts of it happening. Yeah, the footsies in MVC are just within a blink of an eye. You might see a bit of it here and there, maybe a setup into a cross up, but Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is mostly based on layered pressure with assists and burst movement, fast burst movement, not really footsies kind of stuff. I mean, overwhelming your opponent and taking the advantage of the fact that like lots of stuff's going on and it's fast. You know, we don't really call that footsies. I mean, you can just turn up the game speed of a game to where everything's just happening super fast, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's footsies with all of the interactions that you can have in that game. See the end of the Soul Calibur video. Here we go. We're close. Should I skip ahead? Wow, this guy's just taking this guy out. Oh, that's Nightmare? Crazy. And they keep tech dodging the grab-attempts by crouching, which is, you know, I don't know. Oh, that guy got killed. So that was the end of the video. And though both players look like they're acting at the same time for most of the time. That player is so much better than the other player. Oh well. But yeah, footsie is kind of a complex topic. Always gets people to think about things in an interesting way. Always looking for better ways to understand what's happening in these games, right? I'm gonna flip this back on the fighting. I like this video. Let's watch it. Yeah, you lose half your life for doing a DP. So everything to get out of this setup doesn't work unless you use a V-Versal. Next, tap it to break, hit confirming with light attacks. Skip ahead. Wake up throws and autopilot throw teching. So because throws take 5 frames to start up, you know, you can be punched out of them more easily than ever. That makes going through throws defensively on wake up much more risky. And you don't have an option select to beat it this time. So now they can just kind of beat you up for defensively grabbing. And then you can frame trap that pretty well with more moves out because it's 2 frames slower. Stuff like that. Yeah, and don't backdash in Street Fighter V. It's not as invincible, and it's not as good. So like if you try it, you'll get beat up like that. So in Street Fighter 4, there are many ways to escape pressure. Look at all these different ways. You can like block, you can focus attack, you can delayed wake up, you can backdash, and you can DP or whatever. There's much fewer options waking up in Street Fighter V, and you can and so you just got to learn how to block. And that's one of the major differences. They tweak just like by tweaking a few frames on a few things, by tweaking a few properties on a few things, it just changes the whole feel and strategy of the game. Instead of like picking up a random option and probably getting out in Street Fighter 4 because some characters have tons of options, Street Fighter 5 you just gotta learn how to block. They're gonna come in and maybe hit you with something, just block it high, low, and then what? Like that just feeds right back into the game system without having to worry so much about chasing people down. So that's a cool thing for Street Fighter 5. Little differences make a big difference. And also when people stay close right there and they're not afraid of you using a Wake Up Dragon Punch, you can get more into the hand-to-hand stuff that we like so much, and that's why Street Fighter 5 is a lot like Third Strike. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Lesson Pi. Hope you learned something. Hope you come back with more good questions later in the week. Fighting games are neat. It's a lot to talk about. I think the stream, we'll just end the stream about here too. There's lots of stuff to read. I'm gonna click the fighting button, and I'm gonna click Optimal Footsies, and we'll see how much is out there. Just so many things people are saying, and it's just so hard to sort of frame it all in a context where we can understand how these fighting games work the most, because a lot of people get confused about things like what's important, or they underestimate how dynamic some of these game systems are. They'll say something is an issue when it's just a part of a whole, right? And there's so many connected pieces. The importance of instructions. Chris Wager again. We can't listen to another Wager thing. He's been dominating the discussion. But yeah, fighting games are neat, and you know, these ways of looking at fighting games are important. sometimes I feel like people would like a term that isn't zoning and isn't footsies. You know, I just call it burst or rush down or just like, you know, it's just like what you do in an action game. You move around and attack. I don't think you need a particular word for that, because there's a lot of middle ground that you can play around in. But you know, if you think of a good term, let me know. But these are the kinds of things that you can look for and apply to every fighting game to see how they play. I played some pretty exotic fighting games out there. You know, I made one with Barbari Ball. I used to play Ragdoll Kung Fu, which is like a wacky game anyway. I don't even know how to describe a lot of that, but I played some DS fighting games, including the Bleach game and the Drag Blade for Nintendo DS, which I really liked. I played Jump Superstars and Jump Ultimate Stars. And of course, I played Smash Brothers. I played Wii Sports Boxing. I played Super Monkey Fight 2. A lot of things. And once you realize how the games work and you realize that they are fighting games, you get to really do a lot of cool stuff. But if you try to play non-fighting games like fighting games, you usually hit a wall and you're like, oh, there's not much I can do here. This game really isn't built for this. I really can't play footsies. Or you're like, you're running away too much, or it's not really balanced to make footsies worth it. So like, you don't engage in it and you really feel the difference. So keep that in mind. I hope to see you guys Thursday. There's a lot more stuff to talk about. I really want to work on my wrap-up videos. So these chats are great, these streams are great, but I think taking the time to distill everything and make a video of it will do some good. So we'll see what happens. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time. Peace.